Good morning, friends. Good morning. There we are. Now it's going. Good morning, friends. Good to see you this morning. Hang on one second here. We're just going to delete that. Yeah. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. Sorry, I have a little something going on in my head. It seems I've been sneezing like crazy this morning. I hope I'm not all flushed in appearance. If I am, that's what's going on. Let me just have a sip of my coffee. And welcome to another session of PB Reads the Bible. I call it a session because we're gathering together as this small group. So it's a small group gathering. That's even better. Our second small group gathering, known as PB Reads the Bible. What is that? Since it's new, especially since it's new, I'm going to be clear about that for a few times anyway. First of all, PB. That's me, Pastor Ryan, PB for short. Also, I do love peanut butter. And reads the Bible. It's this small group where we gather together, and that's exactly what I do. I read from the Bible, usually about a chapter a day, and then I, share commentary on it, share comments about it, and context, to try to help understand what's actually taking place and what's being said, what it meant then. Because Walter Brueggemann, I didn't want anybody to think I came up with this quote. Walter Brueggemann said, "What it meant then is what it means now." And sometimes we have the tendency to flip that around. We take what something means now and try to inject it back into the scripture, and that's not good, because you're changing the meaning. You're changing the meaning. What it meant then is important to is what it means now. And so sometimes we just have to stop. We have to slow down a little bit and understand better what words meant, what the context is, in order to understand what it meant then. So that's what I try to do. And as you gather and join with me on our sessions, you follow along in your Bibles, or you just listen as I speak, and you share your questions and comments. I love that. But it is a small group, and so we share life together. So the first thing I'd ask is that you let me know you're there. Facebook tells me a number sometimes, actually not the way I'm doing it. I'm using what to me is a new system. It's the old system. I used this for a little while, but of course they keep changing things as well. But I'm seeing people that are there, and thank you for that. Let me know who you are. Good morning, Crystal, and good morning, Mary. Great to have both of you joining our small group today, and I'm sure others will be joining as well. So that's one of the things. As a small group, we let people know. We introduce ourselves. We share those good mornings and those well wishes. We also share the things that are on our hearts and our minds, so that we can keep each other surrounded in prayer and lifted in prayer. And as Paul wrote, celebrate with those who celebrate and mourn with those who mourn. That's what life is all about. Rubber room roll call. John and Cindy checking in. Good morning. Good morning. That's a you might say it's an inside joke. It's an old joke. I'll let you in on it, because I was doing something like this in my prior appointment, and that's what somebody ended up calling this. It was like rubber room roll call when you tell us to check in. So good morning, John and Cindy. Great to see everybody this morning. And again, let me know what's on your hearts and your minds, so we can keep each other surrounded in prayer. Not just me praying for you, but you praying for each other, and yeah, you praying for me as well. Pray that this isn't anything too serious going on here, just a little bit of a head cold or morning allergies or something. Like that, morning allergies. I'm allergic to the morning. And pray for continued healing on my back. It's getting better, but anyway. So great to see you. Let's have a prayer, shall we? Before any great or important undertaking, it is always good to invoke the aid of deity. Good morning, God, and thank you for this day, another glorious day, another masterpiece. And speaking personally, one that I find quite beautiful this morning, with the clear skies and lots of sun. One of my favorite kind of days. A little on the chilly side for me, but that's okay. I think I'm ready for fall. And thank you for those various seasons that help us experience life more fully, perhaps, because of all those things that happen in certain times of year. And we see the beauty of nature all around us, the beauty that you have created and gifted to us and have asked us to take care of and to tend and to enjoy. So thank you for all of that. God, we also ask you for the way you've blessed us with each other, with this gift of relationship with you, and relationship with our co-workers, our partners, our co-missionaries on this earth. We ask for you to bless our time together this morning and open our hearts and minds to receive what you would have us receive today. And we ask these things in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen. All right. All right. So, we're back to Genesis. And we're going to start with what I would consider the true beginning of chapter 2, right? Like I said, there are times in the Bible where you're going to find out where they put the chapter breaks at the wrong spot. And chapter breaks date back to, I think, like 13 or 1400s. I'll have to double check on that. I don't remember offhand. I only read it recently, too, as a matter of fact. I forget the guy's name, that added in chapters and verse numbers. Before that, there were no such things. And I think he got some of them wrong. Again, they didn't ask my opinion. But they're there, and my opinion isn't going to make them change. But I can change them for us. Because those first 3 verses are definitely part of the story that's told in chapter 1. And they're not part of the story that's told in chapter 2. So I said a couple things yesterday. One of them was that there are 2 creation stories. There's the one we dealt with yesterday, chapter 1, verse 1, going through chapter 2, verse 3. The second creation story is the one we're going to read today. It picks up at verse 4 of chapter 2 and runs through the end of the chapter, verse 25. Correct? Yes, verse 25. That's the end of chapter 2. Now, why do I say it's 2 different stories, or why has nobody told you this before? Well, let's answer that one first. Why? You've probably usually thought of it as one creation story, one story of creation, and it may have always been told that way to you and read that way to you because we read too fast, and we just kind of rush from one story right into the other, when in fact there's a definite difference between the two. The stories come from different traditions. The Bible scholars speak about different writers for these stories and these books. And when they do so, they're speaking about the tradition the stories come from. One is called priestly. One is called Yahwist. Those are the 2 main ones that we're going to discuss, especially today. There's also the Deuteronomistic author-editor tradition that's going to be used. And there's a 4th one that's, I'm having a brain cramp. But anyway, we're going to be mostly talking, especially today, about the priestly tradition and the Yahwist tradition. The priestly tradition is considered to have written the first creation story comes from that tradition. And well, maybe I'm giving a little spoilers here as to why, but the language and the depiction of God fits the priestly depiction of God, and it's how God works and stuff. I don't want to give away too much because we're going to talk about the differences later. The story that we're going to be reading today comes from the Yahwist tradition. Yahwist. Now, you may already be ahead of me. At what Yahwist is. Yahwist, and much of their writing, includes the holy, precious, actual name of God that we usually pronounce as Yahweh. Yahweh. if you think back to yesterday, or if you've got your Bibles open, you turn back a couple, a page or so, and you just scanned through the first chapter, the name Yahweh doesn't show up at all. All right. Now, how do we know that, or how do we know? Because it doesn't actually say Yahweh in any of them, right? So there is something called the Tetragrammaton. Tetragrammaton. It's one of those fancy 5-syllable words. Here's what it is. When you're reading the Old Testament, at least if you're using any of the more modern translations, you will see the word Lord appear 3 different ways. Okay? You'll see the word Lord, L-O-R-D, in 3 different forms in the Old Testament. All lowercase letters, L-O-R-D, which would refer to a person. That would be a man. Often the king, or some form of ruler or higher person, hierarchically more powerful person. Lord, L-O-R-D, lowercase, human being, often king. Next, you will sometimes see it capital L, lowercase O-R-D. That would refer to God, generically speaking, but to our God. When you see Lord, all 4 letters in uppercase, L-O-R-D, that signifies that in the ancient Hebrew manuscripts, the name of God is there. What is the name of God? Y-H-W-H. Y-H-W-H. Which we're not going to get to anytime soon, but God gives that name or shares that name with Moses in the story of the burning bush. God says, because Moses wants to know his name, at some point we'll get there, we'll explain why, and God does share his name. It says it's Y-H-W-H. Because of the commandment, you shall, don't use my name in vain. The ancient Hebrews took that extremely literally, probably incorrectly so, but they didn't want to mispronounce God's name. How could you mispronounce it? Because we don't know what vowels were supposed to be in between those consonants. We guess, and it's traditionally spelled Y-H-W-A-H, Yahweh. Oh, it's W-A-H. Yahweh, W-E-H, sorry. Y-H-W-E-H is how it's usually spelt, and that's very possible. And so the pronunciation would be Yahweh. But the Hebrews didn't want to accidentally mispronounce God's name. So when reading the original text, whenever they came to God's name, they would use keywords, Adonai Elohim, something like that. And the hearers would say, God's name. They would recognize that. So, for the same reason, we don't put, in the modern translations, we don't put the word Yahweh. We kind of stick with that Hebrew tradition and put in Lord with all capital letters. When I get to those, you'll hear me say Yahweh. Another way of doing it, especially modern Jews and modern Hebrew Bibles, and I have one, replaces it with Hashem, H-A-S-H-E-M. So you can always do that one as well, which literally means the name. The name. But we're going to go with Yahweh as the best we can. All right. So, if you scanned back through chapter 1, all you saw was the generic name God. In this next section, the second story of creation, you're going to see Yahweh a lot. Okay. So that's one way that we know it comes from a different tradition. The other way is how things happen. So let's get to it, shall we? Oh, and again, Brian, you're talking a lot before we actually get to the scripture. But here we go. Chapter 2, verse 4. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. In the day that Yahweh God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for Yahweh God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no one to till the ground. But a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole face of the ground. Then Yahweh God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being. And Yahweh God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Out of the ground Yahweh God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Let's pause there. Okay, so already I see differences, and I'm going to help you see them too, between the first story and the second story and this story. What's the difference? Well, first of all, the difference is the order. The order. God is creating a human before God creates the other animals. Whereas in the first telling of the first story, the other animals come first, and the human is the last of the created beings. Okay, so that's one thing. Okay, we see it. The whole order is wrong. It's even before rain comes. Or I shouldn't say it's wrong. It's different. The whole order of things is different. It's different. Second, as I said, we've got that Yahweh, this very personal. This chapter 2, the second creation story, is a very personal story. And this is going to be my explanation for the two differences, the two stories, and why. Because I should say this first. How is man created? How is man created, especially in this one, versus how all creation. In the first creation story, things happen because God speaks. God just speaks, and things come into being. Things happen. But look at the second story a little closer. All right? And in particular, right off the bat, with God creating a human, God creates the human out of the dust of the ground. God creates the human out of the dust of the ground. He creates man out of the dust of the ground and breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. Pause on my thought there for a moment just to remind you, breath, wind, and spirit are all the same word, ruach. So it's God's breath, it's also God's spirit being poured into this first man, this first human being. But God is very personal and present in the second story. The second story. We would say that God is right here. God is here on earth in the second story through creation. Whereas the first one, God is this more distant being, all-powerful, just speaking and things into being. And that's what happens. Now, which is correct? They both are. They're coming from those two different traditions. The priestly tradition wants to talk about God as this eminent being, all-powerful, so high above us, and almost distant from their point of view. Okay? Whereas the Yahwist tradition wants to share this story of a God who is more immanent, who is here, who is present. God who is present, God who is here, God who is, I would say, God who's willing to get his hands dirty in the process of creation and bringing us along. Which one is right? They both are. And I think that's why the two stories are here. The traditions and the editors that put these stories together into the book known as Genesis realized that God is too much for one story. We can't have one story that shares everything about God. So we need these multiple stories to learn more about God's character, about who God is, and about how God acts and lives and loves and loves. Okay. One more thing. Verse 7, and I'm going to just look back. Yep, NIV says the same thing. And the man became a living being. Man became a living being. In Hebrew, it's nephesh. Nefesh. Another way to translate that nephesh, the best way to understand nephesh, is possibly to think of soul. Okay? It's something different that God is implanting in this living being. However, it's not only in the human. It's not only in the human, or the humans, perhaps I should say, a male or a female. It's not only in them. The same word, whether or not it's translated living being, I think it is still translated living being, is used to describe at least the higher animals that God creates. Not the lower animals, not the creepy crawly bugs, insects, things. They don't have nefesh. They are not nefesh. They are alive, but they are not nefesh. But the higher animals are. The higher animals are. Okay. Then we now now it speaks about Eden, and you might think of Eden as a physical place, and a lot of people do, and they argue about the location of Eden. Stop. Let's think of this as, and I'm going to use a word that you might not like, especially with regards to the Bible. All right, but allow me to expand upon it too before you make any judgments. Good morning, Bonnie. Great to have you joining us this morning as well. So I'm going to use a word you might not like, especially when we talk about the Bible, but let me expand upon what I mean by it. Okay? Let's think of this story as myth. Now, I know what you're going to say. Oh, geez, this is sacrilege. It's not sacrilege, especially when we think about a full meaning of myth. All right? What is a myth? A myth literally is a story to help us understand something that is incomprehensible or inexplicable, unexplainable in any other way. It explains and points to greater truths. If you remember from yesterday, truth is what we should be about, not necessarily fact. And the Bible is sometimes about fact, right? Don't get me wrong on that. But it is always about truth. And so what is the truths? What are the truths? When we get caught up looking at facts, where was Eden? Where is Mount Ararat? Where did the ark end up? And all that stuff. We miss the point. Ooh, cool. That's actually a segue to that might be considered a teaser for Sunday, because Sunday's sermon and theme is missing the point. But when we concentrate on fact rather than truth, we may very well be missing the point. So don't worry about where Eden was and whether or not it was a real place. Some commentarians actually consider it to, even if apparently they consider it a real place, but beyond the plane of the earth. And they see some of the descriptions of what happens after the fall as showing that there were already cities and places and population in existence beyond Eden, because Eden wasn't actually part of Earth. It's like a veil between these two places. That's a little too much for me. Let's just understand it as a myth, a fable, a story to help us understand something that we can't otherwise understand. So what's the point of this myth, this story? To understand who God is. To understand more about who God is and why God bothered to create. Okay? Those are the more important truths. truths. And we also have now God makes all the trees. See, again, the order is different from the first story to the second story. God makes the trees after God made man. And in particular, God makes these two trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And apparently, here's my confession. I don't read Hebrew. I understand a couple words. I know the meanings of a couple words, but even those words are only after they're anglicized, so I can pronounce them. I can't read Hebrew writing. But apparently the Hebrew is actually vague. And although it's usually translated that they are separate trees, tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it is possible to translate it as that there's only one tree in the center, that it is both the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I wonder if, and I've only recently discovered or learned of this possibility. So I wonder how that changes the story for us, or should it? And so, since I haven't spent enough time contemplating that or doing more research, let's just go with the idea of there being two. We'll go with the traditional telling that there are these two trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God makes all these trees and stuff. Picking up from there, verse 10. A river flows out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stones are there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. Pause. Okay? So everybody says, well, Eden must be a real place. And the Garden of Eden in particular must be a real place because it gives all these definitions. Well, yeah and no. For 2 things. First of all, just because they identify a location doesn't mean it was real. Secondly, we have no idea where some of these places are. We do not know of a river known as the Pishon. Some may say it's this river or that river, but there's no definitive proof. If you're looking for fact, you need definitive proof that there's a river known as Pishon. We don't know where Havilah was. We don't know where the river Gihon was. We don't know where Cush is exactly. And again, there are, because Cush is used in other places as well, and people think it's here or there or somewhere else. We do, of course, know where the Tigris and the Euphrates are. We do know where Assyria was, Mesopotamia. But putting them all together, especially with these unknown places, we can't do. Picking up from there. Yahweh God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. Pause. Okay? So, what's this mean? We often jump to, and yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself perhaps, when we get to the story of the fall, and God speaks about the consequences of the fall and the knowledge of good and evil. Then he says, you're going to have to toil on the land. That's not the part that's the consequences of having to leave paradise. That's not the consequences of having to leave paradise. The consequences are that the ground won't respond. That the ground won't respond in the same way, at least. The idea of work, the idea of being a partner with God in creation is predates that, right? I mean, this is the good thing. This is the good thing. This is where paradise is. And, I mean, we could turn back a few, verse 5, it says, no plant of the field was yet in the earth, for God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and because there was no one to till the ground. What does this mean? We see in this now, since Adam is now responsible for tilling the ground and keeping it, The authors of this story, the tellers of this story, are showing that man is a co-creator, working with God in creation, being given that responsibility by God. God is almost stepping back a little bit. Yeah, God is making is creating the trees and stuff, has created the trees, but now God is putting man into this garden, into paradise, to be a co-creator, to till and keep it. Picking up from there. And Yahweh, which is verse 16, and Yahweh God commanded the man, you may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall die. Then Yahweh God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner. So out of the ground Yahweh God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all cattle, and to the birds of the air, and to every animal of the field. But for the man there was not found a helper as his partner. Pause right there. So again, we see the order is different in chapter 2, the second story, than it was in the first story. In the first story, man was the last of God's created beings. Here, man was the first created being. In the first story, God named all the animals, and now it's man naming all the animals, as God is bringing these animals to man. Let's picture this too. We've got God making all these different animals. Let's just name something, right? A cow. God makes a cow and brings it to Adam. And why is God making these animals and bringing them to Adam? To find a helper, to find a partner for him. So God makes this cow and brings it to Adam, and Adam says, cow. But it's not right. But it's not a helper. So God goes back to the drawing board and brings forth a giraffe. And then God goes back to the drawing board and brings forth a water buffalo. God's doing this back and forth each time, but it's not quite right? It's not quite right. So we see good, but not very good yet. I mean, this is paradise, but not quite. And we have yet to see the right partner, the right helper, the right co-creator for Adam. Adam is part of the creation now at this point, because he's got an important role to play, to help name these animals and to define what their place is. To define what their place is. Pause. Let's go back to the reading now, verse 21. So Yahweh God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that Yahweh God had taken from the man he made into a woman, and brought her to the man. Then the man said, this at last is bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken. Therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. End of chapter 2. Not the end of our conversation now. All right. So, finally, after all the other animals have been made, still haven't found the right helper, God makes this decision to make a female, to make woman, to make another human being. That's the part. That's the important thing. And to make an equal. Some people say, man, the male came first, so the male has priority in hierarchy. We shouldn't see it that way. Because the woman comes from the male. All right, and the whole idea throughout this story, throughout this section of the story, is helper and partner. Now we might hear helper, especially if we only use that word helper. We might think of hierarchical structure, that a helper is not the equal of the doer. That's not the case, especially not in the context. So some translate it as partner, and that's probably a better understanding for this word, or helper partner, or partner helper, because there's more equal in the especially in the ancient Hebrew. This is supposed to be seen as equals, not one better than the other. And some will say, oh, but she came from him, so she needs to be subservient to him. Well, that's ridiculous, because where did Adam come from? The ground. Does that mean that Adam is supposed to be subservient to the ground? No. So let's get away from all that. Don't use this to point out, to back up any kind of patristic society, because it shouldn't be that way. All right. They're supposed to be equals. They're supposed to be partners. They're supposed to be helpers. Now is when we know everything is good. And why? Adam speaks. We hear the first things that Adam actually says. We're told that Adam names all the other animals, but he's actually silent in the story. We don't hear him say anything. We don't see him say anything until now, after Eve is created, after the woman is created, so much so that he names her. And he says, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken." And the understanding, the ancient understanding of these words is even more powerful and closer than we might think or understand. There's a beautiful intimacy in these words. Beautiful intimacy. It really strikes at the idea of them being co-partners, co-equals, co-creators in this story. Man in Hebrew is is, and woman is isafa, something like that. So it's very close together in language. But those last couple verses, and these verses get used incorrectly. IMHO. I should stay on that, right? IMHO, but I'm not the only one who feels that way. Incorrectly, quite often, and to hurt people. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man, let's just take that verse first. The man leaves his father and mother, and clings to his wife. Men did not leave their fathers and mothers so much as the women left their fathers and mothers to join with their husband, because it was a very patristic society. Paternalistic. That's it. Male-dominated society. The women left their homes, their families, and went to the man. And virtually after that had almost nothing to do with their birth families. Not the other way around. This is saying that the men leave their fathers and mothers. That didn't happen. They often lived still with their parents, or at least nearby, because of the family property. You had to keep the property in the family, so they would still be in the same communities, if not right next door, or again, still living with their parents. And they become one flesh. This has nothing to do with sex. This has nothing to do with sex. This has nothing to do with sex. This has nothing to do with procreation. This is just talking about intimacy, closeness, and working together, being partners, being helpers, one flesh. They're that close together because they're right for each other. Now we're getting to something. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. but we're going to hold off on that until our next gathering, when we get into chapter 3, which I apologize. Yesterday, when I talked about how this is going to work, how we're going to do this, and prior to this, I said that it's usually going to be on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and that is true. That is still true. We're usually going to be doing this on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, at least until I decide that it's a little too much for me, and I don't want to get burned out, and might cut it back to only 2 days a week. We'll see on that. So that part wasn't a lie, wasn't a misstatement or anything like that. But I do need to correct something, because I said that this week for sure it was going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I need to correct that, because I cannot do this tomorrow. I'm going to be participating, helping to distribute our Panther Packs. The Panther Packs is a ministry here at St. Andrew's United Methodist Church, where we pack up food, weekend meals for students and in our school system. Yes, children with need. Children with need. We don't want these children to go hungry on the weekends, so we put together packages of food, bags of food for them to take home. They get them on Fridays, I believe, and then they have them for the weekends. Some snacky stuff, but actually some meals. You get cereal and oatmeal and ramen and soup and Chef Boyardee canned spaghetti or something, and Pop-Tarts, and applesauce, and I'm trying to go by memory from what stuff we were spreading out yesterday to get ready. Anyway, we're packed them up tonight, and they're going to be distributing them tomorrow, and I'm going to go along to help and to experience that process, because I haven't done that. Haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. This is our first time of the year. So we will not be gathering tomorrow. And I probably should have quadruple checked on next week. So just bear with me 1 moment while I try to bring up my calendar semi-quickly, and of course it's not quickly, so I can double check what next week looks like. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I can put 11. It looks like right now. It looks like Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are all good for next week. So, we will gather together for our next small group gathering on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. That'll be Tuesday the 17th. And again, if you're not joining live, please still let me know that you're there. Please continue to share your joys and concerns. Please continue to pop up your questions and comments and stuff like that. I do go back in a couple times to see if I missed anything from anyone. Our next gathering is Tuesday. Between today and Tuesday, of course, is Sunday. Today, between Wednesday and Tuesday is a Sunday, and we would love to have you join us for worship on Sunday, or for Sunday school. Sunday school starts at 9 o'clock, and our worship experience starts at 10:30. Sunday school is at 9. We have Sunday school available for any age. We've got preschool children, 5th grade, 6th grade, youth, young adult, adults. We've got people here in Sunday school from age 3 to like 95, right, and everything in between. We would love to have you join us. We've got a class that you can join and gather together with. Some of which are a little bit more generational, and some that are mixed. some that are mixed. So you'd have your pick. Come join us for Sunday school at 9, if you're anywhere nearby. And if you're not, hey, we understand that. Same thing for worship. We have worship. Our worship experience is at 10:30. We would love to have you join us in person. You would definitely be welcome here, so please consider joining us in person. And if you can't because you're too far away or you're not feeling well and all that kind of stuff, if you're not feeling well, please stay home. But if you're not too far away and you can't join us that way, you can always join us right here on Facebook through our live stream. And we're looking to expand our live streaming ministry to YouTube and our website. Might be a couple months before that happens as we decide what system we want to go with, etc., etc., etc. But for now, you can always join us right here on Facebook, 10:30 on Sunday mornings. I do pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something or relearned something this morning. That this has been beneficial to you, and that God has spoken to you in some way through what we've shared this morning. As you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to everything that our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and the lives of those around you. There's miracles happening every day. Say thank you to God, and then tell somebody about it, because we all need to hear those wonderful, wonderful testimonies. Thank you again for joining me. Have a blessed day.